specifically and clearly condone slavery.
Hunter says that God explicitly condones slavery, yet he quotes a passage that does no such thing.
All right, let's see it.
There are two issues I want to discuss in this video. First is the issue of what slavery in Hebrew society actually looked like, and second is the distinction between regulation and approval.
The video wasn't about approval, though. It was about condoning.
When we hear slave, we think of slavery as it was instituted in the United States prior to the Civil War.
I don't think that. I don't think you do either, and neither of the individuals in that video make that connection. So this doesn't seem like it's relevant to this video.
However, a slave in the Torah might better be understood as servant.
In some contexts, yes, but definitely not unilaterally.
If a person was in debt, they could voluntarily sell themselves as a slave as a means of getting rid of their debt. Leviticus 25, the chapter quoted in the video, specifically refers to a person voluntarily selling themselves as a slave because of debt.
So this is intentionally deceptive, because you're talking about verses 39 to 43, which are talking about Israelites, and it explicitly says they are not to serve you as a slave, but as a sachir, or a servant. The video quoted verses 44 and on, which explicitly say that somebody who is not an Israelite can be bought and sold as a chattel slave, as property. So the next minute of your video is a smokescreen where you wax evasive about this debt servitude, which has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the verses that were quoted in the original video.
It's also important to note that Israelites are told in Exodus 21:16 that they are by no means allowed to kidnap people and keep them as slaves or sell them as slaves.
So in addition to the fact that we're still not talking about the sole topic of the original video, which was non-Israelite chattel slavery, appealing to Exodus to try to better understand what's going on in Leviticus imposes the presupposition of univocality, which is not supported by the data. The overwhelming scholarly consensus is that Exodus contains multiple different sets of laws that were composed by different groups in different time periods for different audiences. The same is true of Leviticus, the same is true of Deuteronomy. They have all come together because of literary editing, but the data don't indicate there was ever a time period in which all these laws, as we see them now in the Torah, were enforced together and to the same degree. And so the notion that we can go to these different books and just assume that they reflect one single legal system is not supported by any data.
It's also important to note that God's regulations regarding these practices in a few areas are quite different than what went on elsewhere in the surrounding culture. For instance, in other areas of the ancient Near East, if a slave ran away, they were to be returned and punished, and anybody who harbored the runaway slave could also be punished. However, God tells the Israelites in Deuteronomy 23:15 that they are to give safe haven to the runaway slave and do them no wrong.
So this is cherry picking that is glossing over a lot of problems with this rhetoric. There are some laws in the Hebrew Bible that are more progressive than the laws of broader ancient Southwest Asia, and there are other laws that are more regressive than the laws of broader ancient Southwest Asia. So yes, the Hebrew Bible says to protect runaway slaves, and we have a couple of laws from over 1,000 years earlier where it says to punish people who harbor runaway slaves. But we can also look at the price of male and female slaves in the Hebrew Bible. They're always different. The male always costs more. There are some legal corpora from 1,000 years earlier, from Anatolia, from Mesopotamia, where men and women are always valued exactly the same. So the Hebrew Bible is more regressive in that regard. Now, most of the laws in the Hebrew Bible, apart from the ritual ones and the purity laws, particularly in Leviticus, are actually just pulled from the legal corpora from broader ancient Southwest Asia. In fact, that law that was quoted earlier, Exodus 21:16, don't kidnap somebody to use them as a slave or to sell them into slavery or you get the death penalty. That's just pulled from Hammurabi's laws, which say the exact same thing, but were written over 1,000 years earlier. And there's a great book called Inventing God's Law by David Wright that goes into great detail to demonstrate that Exodus's covenant code is pulling most of its stuff from the laws of Hammurabi. So there are no data that support the notion this is God being progressive. This is just different law codes being written over 1,000 years after the majority of the legal corpora from ancient Southwest Asia. This is a dogma. The data don't support it.
The second issue is that providing regulations for something does not mean you are approving of it.
So this claim takes up the rest of the video, and there are 4 critical problems with this line of reasoning. The first is that it is a straw man. It's utterly irrelevant because, again, the claim was not that the Bible approves of slavery. The claim is that the Bible condones slavery. And regulating something you don't approve of is condoning. It's absolutely indisputable that the Bible condones slavery. The second problem is that, yes, one can regulate something one does not approve of. One can also regulate something one does approve of. So the fact that it's possible that the Bible is regulating something of which it does not approve is not evidence that it does not approve of it. Third problem is the appeal to Jesus, which again imposes the presupposition of univocality by suggesting something somebody wrote in the late 1st century CE needs to govern something written centuries before. Fourth problem is related to the second. Just because an author had Jesus rationalize divorce as something that God didn't like but allowed anyway is not evidence that slavery was not approved of by the authors of the Bible. It's just saying, hey, this is another possibility. So until you can provide data that that is how it was rationalized anciently, all you're doing is saying it's another possibility, which, as I have stated before, is just trying to gin up the tiniest little sliver of not impossible, so the folks who already agree with you can feel legitimized in their belief.